call this joint meeting of the Downtown Parking and Transportation Circulation Committee attendees to order. Roll call.
I'll start with the Downtown Parking Committee. Vice Chair France.
Here.
Committee Member Labrie.
Here.
Committee Member Newkirk.
Here.
Committee Member Zarate.
Here.
Chair Pinner and Committee Members Pratt and Silver are absent. I'll start the roll call for Transportation and Circulation Committee. Committee Member Rodriguez.
Here.
Committee Member Sanford.
Here.
Committee Member Horn.
Here.
Committee Member Seedslag. Here. Thank you.
Great. At this time, I'll ask if there are any changes to the agenda. Seeing none, I'll move on to public comment. If there's any comment pertaining to items not on this agenda, seeing none, I will move to announcements.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, Mr. France. We are also broadcasting online right now, so we may have public comment from people participating via Zoom. So NAMI can assist you with that.
Great, thank you. I'll take that pause and we'll look to see if there's anyone with us online that might like to make a public comment. Naomi, please.
There are no online speakers at this time.
Great. Cool. Thank you. I'll move on to item 5, announcements. If there are any announcements from our staff team.
Mr. France, the only announcement is obviously we're in council chambers. This is a different setting for both of these committees. And as I just mentioned, we are simultaneously on Zoom, which we don't usually do for Downtown Parking Committee. So just a reminder to please speak into your microphone, make sure it's turned on so that the system picks it up and our audience who is participating remotely can hear you.
Great. Thank you. And the item that we're all here for this morning, item 6, the State Street Master Plan update.
Thank you, Mr. France. Committee members, so we're very fortunate today to have Tess Harris here with MIG Consulting, and she will introduce the consultants to you and give a presentation and update on where they're at in terms of the process and then get some of your feedback. So thank them for attending.
Great. Thank you very much, Ms. Clark. Hi, everybody. It's really nice to see all of you this morning. My name is Tess Harris. I'm the State Street Master Planner for the City of Santa Barbara. With me on my right is Mukul Malhotra with MIG Consulting. He's a principal with MIG and also their Director of Urban Design. Really happy to have him as part of the team. And then right behind us is Mr. Bolton. Timmy also is part of the city staff working on the State Street Master Plan as a project planner. I'm going to kick us off and just talk very briefly about some of the community engagement efforts, and then I'm going to pass the majority of the presentation over to Mukul, and he'll walk through the rest of it. So we're going to start out, we're going to go through the project purpose and process, and then we're going to talk about community engagement, emerging and existing conditions analysis, and then we'll talk about some of the next steps and what all of you hope to see throughout the process. Just as a reminder, this is the project area. We're looking at the space from Sola to the 101 underpass and then Chapala to Anacapa Street. This just gives a quick highlight of the overall timeline for the project. So we're really right in between those first two items. We're gearing up for the urban design framework. And we've been doing compiling a lot of the existing conditions analysis, things like mobility information, parking data, overall design, looking at figure ground and looking at what types of things exist on the weekday and the weekend, and looking at stormwater, utility infrastructure, and then also doing a lot of community outreach to try and better understand what the community really wants to see in the downtown area and what they like currently, what maybe they want to see changed as well. And then the timeline will take us to approval, likely between December 2023 and February of 2024. So we're really looking at having the maybe the biggest highlight here is that we're looking in April, so in that spring time frame, of starting to have some preliminary design concepts. So a few different design concepts that we'll be sharing out with the community. And then by the summertime, by about August, we'll have a preferred design concept that we'll then start to take towards hearing. So the community and general public should really start to get a sense of where we're going in just a few short months. We're going to just quickly highlight some of the community and stakeholder engagement. So we have an existing survey that's currently out. I hope that all of you will take it if you haven't already. If you go to statestreet.santabarbaraca.gov, you can find that survey, and I can also give that to you after as well. The survey is both in English and Spanish. This number, as of last night, has increased, so we have about 5,700 responses so far. We're going to close the survey at the end of this year, and really hoping that that number just continues to increase. We want to get as much input as we can. And then we've been doing different types of community events in English and Spanish, all around downtown, and then also elsewhere in the community. This is highlighting just some of the city organizations and then other groups that we've started to talk to. So having one-on-one interviews, going to different commissions and committees and providing short announcements about the project, talking with various city staff and council members and other groups as well. And then just highlighting some of the work we've done over the last 2 months. So we're closely coordinating with the library. This Friday we have another event. They've been active out on State Street and doing with their Library on the Go van. So last week we had a tie-dye event with them. A couple weeks prior to that, we had a construction event with them geared towards kids and families. And then this coming week, we're having a holiday card making and stamping of wrapping paper. So hope you'll come see us on the 700 and 800 blocks of State Street from 3:30 to 5. We've participated in the downtown organization block parties that happen monthly. City staff has been at the farmers market a few different times at the different locations on Tuesday and Saturday. And then we've also reached out to all of the schools at the Santa Barbara Unified School District. So far, we've been to the 4 that you see on the slide and are communicating with others as well, hoping to get into particularly the 3 high schools in the January timeframe. We've been to one of the neighborhood navigation centers talking with the unhoused population about what they also would like to see in the downtown core. And then been up to La Cumbra area, been in different parks in the city, really trying to go beyond just being downtown and physically on State Street. These are some of the groups that we've started having conversations with, including the joint meeting that is today. We've also had a joint meeting with the Historic Landmarks Commission and the Planning Commission. And then I'm just going to run through a couple different photos of our events. So in November 3rd and 4th, we held an open house at 1230A State Street. And I want to thank one of the committee members for helping with that, Mr. Labrie, to just helping get us in a location and making it really successful, being right on State Street to get that input. We are estimating we had about 500 people come through in those 2 days. We were there at various times of the day and a couple different days on Thursday and Friday in coordination with First Thursday. And then this past weekend, we had community workshops at 821 State Street on the 9th and the 10th, also at various times of the day. The one on the 9th in the morning was geared towards design professionals, still open to the public, and then the rest were all open to the general public. So these are some photos of that space as well, and really trying to. So what we did in that area is broke the group into smaller groups, and then had each small group start to design a couple blocks of State Street and downtown, and also talk about some of the mobility questions that exist with the project. Some of your committee members were also in attendance there, so thank you for joining us and getting involved in that process. So now I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Malhotra, who will talk about some of the existing conditions and analysis.
Thanks, Tess. So just as Tess mentioned, we are also complementing all of these efforts with Spanish-speaking only meetings and workshops, including meetings we have done at churches, Foodland grocery store, as well as the Harding Elementary. And there is going to be a Spanish-speaking only design workshop that will happen this Sunday from 10 to 2 p.m. English speakers are also welcome. The big thing is starting with the community vision. We have clearly heard from the community that they would like to have a safe experience for all users, make it people-centric so we can bring people downtown. There has been a lot of good feedback on economic revitalization and ensuring we strengthen downtown's identity, making sure it's for locals, and a lot of good feedback as part of the overall vision is to facilitating housing within downtown. One of the big things that the community has talked about, what they love about this area is the identifiable character. As you can see by the green buildings, we have wonderful historic sites as well as buildings, as well as very iconic districts that we can experience as we walk. A lot of the community members have also talked about the wonderful stories, not just that the buildings tell, but there are key milestones that can be celebrated all along the corridor. With regards to multimodal access, we have a wide modes of travel, as you can see on the map, indicated by the red for different types, be it arterial roads, minor arterial, major, collectors, so on and so forth. And we do have a network of bicycle facilities that vary from class 4 to class 2. And that is some of the key feedback that we are looking to hear back from the community as to, with regards to State Street, what kind of bike facility they would like to see. Do they want it on the parallel streets, cross streets, so on and so forth. Another key element of the discussion is the public transit route, especially some sort of a shuttle service. We have the MTD Center, Transit Center just a block away from our project area, easily walkable. And how do we connect that along with, of course, the Santa Barbara Amtrak station, which is a major regional multimodal node? We do see a wide variety of mobility uses, especially where the street is closed. We do see bicyclists use it in a wide. They bike in the middle, but we have also seen bicyclists biking on the sidewalks too. Looking at the bicycle counts, and we do have Fair and Peers as part of our team members who are helping us with the overall multimodal analysis, is we do see that midday and weekend counts based on what the city did at the 10 intersections of State Street from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. The key things to keep in mind is that the vast majority of bicyclists go through the intersections, of course, in the north and the southbound direction. There is greater variation in the east-west directions. Some areas have high counts, such as Ortega Street and Sola Street. It begins to peter off. In general, the weekday bike counts are 10 or 20% lower, and the same we also see with regards to pedestrian activity that I will briefly discuss. The key thing that we have been discussing with the community at large is to look at where and what kind of bicycle facilities should be designed for different streets that builds on the network of bicycle facilities that are envisioned for the larger downtown area. So people with different abilities and comfort level would like to see different facilities on different streets. Like I briefly mentioned, we have a rich network of transit facilities that come to the MTD Transit Center, and also looking at different opportunities for a future transit, which we have been clearly hearing, some sort of a small shuttle that would connect different parts of state to other amenities a few blocks away, but also to the wharf is something that we are hearing, and other cities such as Culver City and Santa Monica are looking at transit on demand model, and is something that could be explored potentially in this project too. Overall, looking at the collision analysis, especially before the street was closed and then after the street got closed in 2020, we are clearly seeing that there is a reduction in both crashes and injuries. So the closure of State Street has helped with improving the overall safety, especially as it relates to the vehicles. But we have been hearing again and again consistently that there is a lot of conflicts between pedestrians and bicyclists, especially in the section where the State Street is closed, and that's something that would have to be addressed. There is a lot of robust pedestrian activity, as has been done by the pedestrian counts that the city did from June to August 2022. Again, we are seeing majority, a high tick in walking on weekends. It's almost 40 to 50% higher than weekday, and then certain intersections have higher counts than others. The community is beginning to speak about different ideas that they would like to see and exploring different thoughts as to what they want State Street to be it for walking, biking, integrating transit, or driving. And that's something that we are taking into account to look at different options that will be developed, like Tess said, in the next few months. We do have a lot of parking lots, and they are used in different ways during the weekday and during the weekend. The key critical takeaway is generally there is parking availability in the study area across all the lots, and 3 lots, 6, 8, and 10, which are on the east side of State, are largely underutilized, not across the week, but definitely in most parts of the week too. And then again, what people has expressed is that the streets are being used for different purposes. Some are busy during the weekday, others are busy during weeknight, and the opportunity of creating temporal streets so that they can transform their use and function different parts of the season on weekends or weeknights or weekdays is critical. The 2 maps that you see out here show which buildings are open in general, say during the day on a weekday, and then are closed and as a result do not contribute to street life during, say, a weeknight after 7 p.m. and on Sundays. So that is something then is an opportunity which the community is exploring with regards to looking at, hey, can there be gathering activities, be it seating or small performances, art exhibitions, so on and so forth, that would help activate the street even when we don't have buildings open, adjoining buildings open. And you can begin to see certain heat spots that the community is feeling may be better. With regards to passive activities and landscaping, you can clearly see the community is responding that they would like to see it all along the corridor. When we look at playing activities, there are, again, key areas, for example, at Paseo Nuevo, where there is a desire to have more play activities. It could be passive games, or it could be fixed exercises, or even playgrounds. And the next steps, as Tess briefly mentioned already, is to finish the survey end of the year and then begin to summarize the community input so we can come back to the community with 3 preliminary design concepts. Oh, go ahead.
And so with that, we wanted to open up the discussion to the group and really start to identify what the Downtown Parking Committee and Transportation and Circulation Committee think about what is currently working or not working in the space. What do you like, or what do you maybe not like as much in the downtown area right now? What do you want to see there in the future, and what do you hope the master plan will accomplish? And I recognize that these are really broad questions, but they start to have that give us an idea as you brainstorm through different thoughts that each of you perhaps individually have, and then if there is something collectively that the group wants to provide input on for the staff team, that would be really helpful as we start to think about the different urban design concepts. Another way in thinking about it is, as you know, all of you have different expertise in terms of transportation and circulation and downtown parking, you know, maintenance and cleaning and just overall the downtown core. You see it in your committees, and so our team would really like to better understand what types of things should we really be aware of, and what things should we make sure are part of the existing conditions analysis that we get right at the beginning, so that as we go into design concepts, we're not proposing something that can't be done or that is much harder to do in terms of a maintenance standpoint, or perhaps in terms of overall circulation. And so the point of today really is to have this feedback. So perhaps we can start to have this conversation. Before we do that, though, I did want to stop and just see if the committees had any specific questions on some of the existing conditions analysis that was presented by McCool, or the community input provided.
Thank you, Tess Harris. And before we go to questions for the two groups, I'd just like to thank our presenter from MIG, correct? And actually, if you could just help us as we ask you questions, if you could reintroduce yourself.
Sorry, I apologize. My name is Mukul Malhotra, and as Tess said, I am the principal at MIG.
Great. And it looks like Tess is writing that out. Thank you. Just because we'll certainly want to ask some questions your way. So thank you so much for the presentation. And I will turn to questions. I'll turn to our guests at Transportation Circulation first. Ms. Rodriguez, you had a question? Others?
Thank you very much for this presentation and this opportunity. I just have some clarifying questions for me. On the vehicular access chart, I can't read any of the notations. I mean, it's a big chart put on a small space, and I want to know what the legends say, and even with my reading glasses, I'm struggling. So I think that's really important for me to.
So we can, as we show the slide, what the legend is saying is in the dashed black line, it's showing the project area.
Okay.
In the light gray lines that you see, it's showing our existing paseos.
Okay.
There are 3 different weights in terms of the weight of the line, thickness of the line in red color, and they show where we have principal arterials, for example, on Carrillo Street, minor arterials, and then major collectors. Similarly, we have 3 different weights for green color, which all show 3 different types of bike facilities, with the thickest being class 4 bike lanes and the thinnest being class 2 bike lanes. And the dashed green line that we see on Sola, for example, are the proposed city bike facility. And then lastly, the blue line shows major transit routes.
And is that public transit route?
Yes.
Above?
It is public
Okay,
transit.
thank you very much. It's an important chart. I want to make sure I understand the legend. Now, can you explain a little bit more about how you measured collisions?
This was the data that we received from the city on, they regularly collect collision data, and it's the data we gain from the city. And some of it is provisional in nature. In 2021, for example, it takes time to finalize this data, and we do note that.
Okay. So there were crashes of bikes or between bikes and pedestrians. It's not specific. It's fine if it's grouped.
There is additional data in terms of what are, for example, an automobile-related collision where bikes are impacted or pedestrians are impacted. We just didn't integrate it in the show, but we do have that data, and we are still analyzing it.
My impression of your presentation was that these are specific to the area that's closed to cars.
We did take into account from Sola to Gutierrez.
Yeah, so good. I mean, that's fine. It's specific to the non-car area. Good.
There are 2 blocks, sorry. From Gutierrez to Haley, which is open, and then Sola to Victoria. Which
Thank
is
you.
open.
Yeah, thank you, sorry. Okay. And you mentioned the parking structures that are underutilized, and you said 6, 8, and 10. Which ones are those?
They are, if we, and the 6, 8, and 10 are all on the east end, on the east part.
So lot 6 is the one right behind the Granada Theater. Lot 8 is the lot in between Figueroa and Carrillo on Anacapa side. And lot 10, I believe, is the one in between Ortega and Coda, also on the Anacapa side.
Okay, that was interesting. And I don't know what the word temporality means.
So it's a big word. I totally agree. But in general, temporal basically means the ability to create temporary spaces that can then change based on the time of the day or the season, if it's a weekday or a weekend, and that's what temporality is, its ability to change. Please don't quote me if someone sees a different definition in the Oxford Dictionary. I'm explaining it with regards to a street.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Rodriguez. Other questions? Yes, Ms. Horn.
One detail that I wondered about is I'm always interested in bicycle storage. So if someone comes downtown and they want to go on the no-car area, where would they park their bike? So that, I mean, you did mention that in the presentation, but just, I'm very interested in learning about that.
That is part of the feedback that we have also heard is the desire for more and frequent bike storage facilities, not just on state, but also on the cross streets. And that's an opportunity as we look at different options to integrate that feedback.
Okay.
Yes, Ms. Sleichlag?
Yeah, thank you for all this. This is great. I understand at this stage you've done a lot of the community engagement. I'm also kind of wondering how you're thinking about, or are there any kind of parameters? I'm thinking around like emergency vehicle access or like maintenance vehicle access. When I go down State Street in the morning, I see, the maintenance vehicles are coming down and doing repairs, and kind of what do you need in place for that?
So we have been very clear with the community, but also different stakeholders, based on the feedback. As Tess said, we have talked to different departments, including fire and police, and there is a very clear need to have a 20-foot access all along State Street in any scenario, whether it's open, closed, it doesn't matter. And that is something that we also kept into account as the community was coming up with different options. A requisite design element, the number one design element, was to have a fire/police access. That same access area is used by the maintenance facilities at State Street right now, is open in the morning to allow for the delivery and the maintenance to happen. And that is one of the options that can be continued as different alternatives are developed.
Just adding on that, I mean, one of the things that we recognize is that there are other communities that have a promenade type area. Many of them do have alleyways or access to the rear of buildings, and the configuration that we are working with doesn't have that for all of State Street. And so that, however we do maintenance and access, that's a key input that we're gonna be thinking about through the design concept. The fire lane piece, I just wanted to highlight because it came up in some of the community design workshops. When we're putting out a 20-foot fire lane, today it looks like a street, and that's what we have. It doesn't have to look like that. It can be it can look like something, you don't have to recognize that it's a street in order for a fire lane to exist. Same thing with, you could have it layered where you might have a transit service or you might have a bike lane facility that also is the fire lane piece. So, so we do have some, even though it's 20 feet, there's some room to work there with that.
And I think the photos, for example, on the lower right show that. That does serve as a fire access lane, but it has paving that does not make it look like a roadway.
Yes, Ms. Sanford.
Yeah, so I wanted to touch on the safety aspect, the multimodal safety aspect. So currently, like, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but like the data that you're showing, it pertains to State Street collisions. And then I'm just wondering, how are you taking into account the other streets in the project area, Anacapa and Chapala? And part of why I'm asking this is because historically, State Street has, you know, provided a pretty good facility even prior to the closure, like by providing a pretty safe bike lane, safe kind of being relative. But I'm just wondering, I guess, how you take into account the amount of people who might be detouring to State Street and avoiding our potential collisions on Anacapa and Chapala. And the reason I'm asking this is because those are pretty fast-paced streets that really don't have adequate facilities. And
We are also studying the collision data on Anacapa, Chapala, the zero blocks, the cross streets that is, and also what we have really noticed, especially before the closure of State Street, is exactly how you mentioned it. People were avoiding pedestrians and bicyclists. Most of the traffic was happening in terms of walking and biking on State to we don't have facilities if you're a bicyclist on Anacapa and Chapala. So as a result, a lot of the collision data with ped and bike was more concentrated on State. That's why you see the change between before and after the closure, but we are also studying Anacapa and Chapala. But if I compare it to State, if memory serves me right, there were less collisions just because the people were avoiding going there.
thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Mr. Newkirk.
Thank you. I had a question on slide 39 about what is it meant by opportunities for parking management plan, and like what the ideas would be about spreading out parking demand. I guess maybe like those last three bullets, like what are the thinking with those three opportunities?
So keeping in mind that certain lots are utilized more than others, one of the opportunities to see how do you see better utilization of underutilized lots, and then at the same time to spread the demand. If some are being utilized more than others, what is the opportunity that there is an opportunity for the people to go to the more underutilized lots, which in our case is like 2 blocks away. If you're driving, that's not that far. So how does a person know we can do that very conveniently? The parking management plan is an opportunity to look at both the parking lots, be it in structures, surface parking lots, or on street, as most cities have done, to be more smart about it, so that you see where there is parking in the entire region, be it on street, in surface parking, or in a structure. That in general actually helps reduce people finding parking and taking time finding parking, and just allows for less aggravation in general. The last is the redevelopment part of it is something that is one of the charges of the project, to look at opportunities if there are certain parking lots or structures that are underutilized. Is there an opportunity to look at redevelopment opportunities to have a better use for them? There's a lot of discussion and feedback we have heard from the community about improving housing, residential opportunities, and a number of communities have looked at as buildings that have housing plus parking on the ground.
So follow up to that, have you guys talked to the housing authority about that potential?
Yes, committee members and Mr. Newkirk. So the Housing Authority is one of the organizations that we've had initial conversations with about the project, but it's on, this specific question is one that we're still going to be talking with them about. I think that, you know, just to say that the city is really interested in exploring the different potential opportunities for redevelopment, if that exists and if there is that, that potential, just recognizing that housing needs downtown and bringing housing more, whether it be there or elsewhere, that in order for this plan to be successful, we also need to have the people to make it successful. And the city's experiencing a real need to have more housing of all different levels of income. And so, so that's a charge that we're really trying to recognize and trying to make sure we keep in mind as we're thinking about the public space. And maybe going a little bit beyond that, how do we create, this isn't just then downtown for the city, but it becomes a neighborhood. How do we create the feel of a neighborhood space where you may not have open space in the traditional sense? You know, you may not have a front and backyard if you live downtown, or you may not have a parking space. So how does this public space area then become that for an entire community? And that's really, I think, that's really what we're trying to come up with.
Thanks. And final question, what is the right-of-way width on State Street?
It's generally 80 feet wide.
Thank you.
Just to clarify, the 80 feet is from building frontage to building frontage. So when you look at the actual street, it's about 40, and then anyway, it adds up to 80 when you get the sidewalks included as well.
Yeah, and just to be clear, like, that's what we're talking about with this plan is the 80 feet, right?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Newkirk. Mr. Labrie.
Yeah, Ms. Harris and Mr. McCool, thank you again for the presentation. I wanted to make an observation about the last line of questions and comments, that many years ago, the community used the creation of parking assets to encourage and really partner with the community property owners to redevelop and improve the uses on their site. So I think we would love to see more pedestrian space and open spaces at ground level, and parking at ground level takes up a tremendous amount of space. So I would encourage the process to consider the future value of those parking assets in encouraging the right kind of redevelopment around downtown. It's, you know, though they're noted as largely underutilized assets, they're also far larger than the undeveloped surface lots. So the capacity to solve community problems is greater. So the tack I'm taking is to look at these as tools and resources to leverage to help the redevelopment of downtown. And you know, housing is, I think, a very important priority that is, you know, it's not as in our face as, you know, the street condition, but it's an important piece of this conversation. So I just wanted to make that observation about the parking assets. And then also the opportunity on the side streets and throughout the Paseo, the unfinished Paseo master plan of downtown, that there are great opportunities to increase open space and pedestrian assets, again, if we are not looking to, for instance, the side streets to necessarily solve so much parking demand, because we've got off-street assets. So two comments at this point. And I want to thank you again for the presentation. I'm really interested to see what precipitates out of all of the community input too in terms of ideas. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Labrie. Mr. Zarate.
Yeah, I just had a couple thoughts. The two things that really stuck out to me was the temporality of State Street, and do we think that means opening State Street to cars at some point during the day and then closing it off during at night? Is that kind of what the idea is?
Right now, all options are open, but if we look at it right now, State Street is open in the morning for, only for a few hours, but it is open in the morning for delivery and so forth, and maintenance. And, I was just walking, there's a huge crew out there cleaning it all up. And so, yes, it's something that will be explored.
Okay. And then also with the example of Fred San Diego, bringing in I guess we already have our transit thing. Would that just mean starting it up again? Our, what's the MTD shuttle?
We have heard some feedback from MTD as well as city staff about the expense and, how it was very expensive to keep it going. And also keeping in mind, this is a long-term plan, and it's looking at trying to maximize the newest and the best proven technologies that would work for this project area. So what the Fred is trying to do, and it's only one of other options, is to look at a smaller vehicle and not a big typical MTD transit bus. And so look at all of those opportunities. So we are not really saying no to any one option, but we have repeatedly heard, even last night, but also we heard it on Friday and Saturday, a clear need for some sort of a shuttle service, but also a clear desire that it be more smaller, compact, more efficient, and exploring travel on demand.
And then I also just have one more thing. You mentioned some of the feedback you've gotten from people is that they want State Street to be designed for locals. Did anyone talk about a little bit more of what that meant? Or what do you mean when what do you take when people say designed for locals?
Yeah, so there are two parts to it. One of the things that we have heard from different parts of the community is, a lot of people consider State Street as their main street for the city, but there are also a lot of people who do not consider State Street as their main street. So clearly a desire and an opportunity that it becomes the main street for all folks in Santa Barbara. The other part of designing it for locals, and this is something that we heard from as part of what the city council has discussed in the past, is if you design a street for locals where all the locals want to hang about, that's where tourists like to come to, because that's one of the biggest attractions. Like if you go to a new city and you say, hey, where should I go? And you're like, we want to go where the locals go. And so that has a double opportunity, is if you fulfill the needs of the locals, you are also then helping visitors. We are also keeping in mind that this is a major street that does cater to tourists, and it's a major economic development for the tourists. So that is also being integrated, but not forgetting the locals is the underlying theme for that vision.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Zarate. I'll ask maybe two quick questions, and then I know we have time for discussion. So, Mr. Malhotra, in terms of the length of the pedestrian corridor as it is now, or the State Street corridor, the project area, how does the length compare to other project areas that you've worked with in the past?
That's a really good point. So different streets, or different streets that are closed, that are working, let's just say pretty well, all of them have challenges, obviously, that through, especially post-COVID, that they're trying to take care of. They vary in length. For example, Santa Monica is about 3 blocks. Pearl Street, Boulder, which is a really good example, is about 4 blocks. The size of the blocks vary, obviously, compared to our blocks. Our blocks are They vary again, they can go from 400 to about 500 feet. So that was one of the first big questions we asked the community to say, are you comfortable in keeping the existing section of State Street that is closed to remain closed? And a lot of people did say yes, but there is no straight answer, direct answer to your question. I apologize, just because if you look at some of the more European examples, they are closed a long way, much longer. They're closed for more than a mile. So it really varies on the context, and if there's enough energy you can provide all along the corridor area to sustain the closure of the street. So it's a little bit of a chicken and egg thing, and that's where the desire to explore different activities all along the corridor. Like, you don't want to walk if there's no reason to walk.
Yeah.
But if you give people enough reasons to walk, they will walk, and they feel comfortable and safe to do so. Generally, we do consider as a thumb rule, a quarter-mile rule. It's a 5-minute, hey, I'm willing to walk for about 5 minutes, but it's the perception of time. Like, sometimes you are willing to walk for 15 minutes, which is the length of this area, to walk, if you give them adequate reasons to be able to do so.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for bringing that bigger perspective.
Just highlighting a couple other examples within the U.S. that are longer. So the area, when you include the 1300 block and down to the underpass, it's about a mile. The closed area right now is 0.8 miles, and then you add the 2 blocks, and you get about a mile. Denver has 16th Street Mall. They're just the MIG team has actually been working with the city of Denver to really revitalize that space as well, and that's over a mile in length. That one has some different transit opportunities provided, and so that one's a really interesting one just to look at because of the similar length. The other one I've come across is Lincoln Road in Miami in Florida. Also, it's, I think, about 1.5 miles in length, and they have it, but it's segmented, so there are different opportunities depending on where you are in the space. And just want to really re-emphasize what Mr. Malhotra has stated. I think initially a lot of for me personally, I've thought, 3rd Street Promenade, Pearl Street Boulder, those are great examples, and they are much smaller, and that's true. And they're pedestrian spaces, and they're about 0.3 and 0.4 miles in space. That doesn't mean that's what this community necessarily needs. It could be. That could be where we end up in design, but it also doesn't mean that has to be the way that we do it. And I want to pull us back to really emphasize that we are different from other communities, and that's the point of this plan, is to make our downtown really special for our community and really something that people are going to want to experience that is way outside of what they might experience in a metropolitan city, that just looks different and is different. And so that's the exciting part of it. And I don't think, we've heard a lot of different input from the community on the space, but it was really, it was fascinating during the community design workshops to hear how many groups enjoyed the length of the closure today and wanted to see some type of design that incorporates the entire space.
Thank you for that, and I'll echo that. I get to ride down most all mornings the full length, either on my bike or on a bike share. And on that note, my other question is about sort of the activation and the temporality. Something I noticed, and maybe there's some inaccuracies here. For example, there's a lot of private events at like El Paseo, which is on the 800 block, which is one of those that's listed as not as active in the evenings. But also, overlapping project in the project area is the De La Guerra Plaza. Yes. And there's all the commercial kind of thoughts, and certainly like bars and restaurants, but in terms of cultural activities that are open, and Mr. Malhotra, you mentioned not everybody saying that State Street is their main street, right? And maybe there has been, opinion by Ed, like overemphasis on economic development to the detriment of local buy-in, right? But cultural activities, not just the big parades, right? And De La Guerra Plaza is potentially like a hub for that. So I just wondered how those cultural activities, and certainly De La Guerra Plaza, are being included in the thought. That's a big, big discussion, I know, but just from that slide of temporal activity, just from that perspective.
So a couple of things on that. So one, when people were doing the mapping exercise, which is what you see in this heat map, we asked them to tell us wherever they want the facilities, different types of gathering facilities in the project area. And to be honest, people respond to what they see on the ground right now, even though we did have these images. And a lot of people said they would like to see these activities, what you're seeing in these heat maps right now, which are, say, the private paseos or De La Guerra Plaza right now. And I think, yes, what we are doing is we are closely coordinating with the design, and that is happening on De La Guerra, and making sure we complement what happens on State Street complements, and the same goes with the Library Plaza project too. So once we come to downtown, we can do a lot of things, and it's not an artificial boundary, oh, we are just doing it on State, thinking of multiple places you can do these activities all over the project area as you can. The other part with regards to cultural activities, yes, we are hearing again and again, especially when we are doing the Spanish-speaking only meetings, is that there are a few things to keep in mind, especially from folks who right now do not consider, for example, State Street as their main street, is that they're saying, why would we come here? And we ask them, why do you come here? So some of the responses we have got, for example, they've said, they come with their families. And whenever they try to come, especially if they're in East and West Side and it's not easily accessible for them, or conveniently accessible for them to come to State, is they usually come with families, and they want to see more family activities. Yep. And that is kind of missing right now. The other part of it, there were some ideas that were thrown at, give us more reasons, and so some people said, hey, what if we had some school bands come and perform? I would love to see my grandchild or my child come and play. And so slowly, so there's a barrier that has to be broken, whether it's real or perception, that there could be reasons to come out here. One of the biggest barriers, or let's just say what the community, Spanish-speaking community, and others also have said, is the affordability component. Like when they come, they like to spend a few hours. Where do they go to eat? Are there affordable options to eat out here? So that is one of the other things that they have expressed, is to think of it culturally in terms of giving more reasons for them to come, how they like to experience it. There are also feedback we got where some community members said is, we could drive through it. They told us stories when they used to drive through State Street, and that was a wonderful part of experience, especially when they had relatives visit them, because it is a beautiful street in all scenarios. So those are just things to keep in mind, and we are keeping all of that feedback into account.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I will shift to the discussion. Or actually, I'm sorry, follow-up question, Ms. Sanford.
Thank you. Yeah, I do have a question kind of to add on to what Ed France just said about just activation and public space. And I know that the parameters of this project are really looking at the streetscape and the mobility. And you said earlier that it kind of goes from the building front to the building front. But is there anything that this plan can do or is doing to look at, the vacant storefronts and sort of the lack of attractions? I'd say, in my opinion, it's probably one of the bigger detractors from people, walking the entire, landscape. And to speak a little more to the, the attractions for families, I just spent a year working on a roller rink project, and I can't tell you how many people would just come up to me and say, oh, I'm so excited for this, my kids are gonna play at this and stuff like that. And I just know that it's a major attractor and something that's needed for the community.
So I apologize. I was remiss in introducing another key consultant member in our team, which is strategic economics, and they are actually looking at the overall economic development and where possible revitalization. So they have looked at some of their initial analysis is saying that yes, while a lot of the good economic activity is relating to bars and restaurants, there is potential for example, more office space, definitely potential for more housing, which will help activate this space. But what the other key thing that they have said, and it's not just something specific to Santa Barbara and State Street, but it's a growing trend, is the desire for experiential space. So you know how the typically we used to talk about anchor tenants like Macy's or Nordstrom's. The new anchor tenant in today's day and age, especially in the case of Santa Barbara, is experience. And we have the best assets in terms of our weather and also beautiful architecture, so on and so forth. So we already have those very sound bones and foundations to build upon. And that's something that they are looking at. How does the city build on that to attract more destinations and uses and not have the empty storefronts?
I just wanted to add a quick comment to that as well. So this plan is looking at the public space area, but another piece of the plan that I think could certainly exist once we get towards the final point when we think about implementation is also policy changes or improvements to overall process. And so going beyond just what is the physical design, but how do we incentivize and encourage different development downtown that maybe doesn't exist there today, and what does the city need to do to encourage that? So anyway, I just want to highlight that is something that you don't see in the concept, you're not going to see in the concept designs, but that we're actively trying to think about what are the other things that can happen to try to encourage different development downtown.
Thank you. One more question, Ms. Horn, and then I know we're going to have a healthy conversation, so yes.
Okay. This is not necessarily a transportation question, but when we're talking about public spaces, and one of the things that is clear to me over the last number of years is that there is a civic component of that is temporary, off and on happens, where people have gatherings, and I'm thinking of the corner of where the art museum is, and that corner, Manapoo State, and that's become a place where people gather for civic organization meetings, like protests and vigils and things like that, and that's an alternative to some of the other places that are like that. And people need a place to be able to gather for those kinds of things. And so I haven't heard that mentioned yet, but those kinds of civic opportunities. And when I look at how long that area is, it seems pretty long. There's places for where there could be more plaza-like areas, and other places for more of a corridor type. And anyway, just wanted to mention that as one of the components that's always been a very important part to civically to our community.
Great. Mr. Bassi.
Mr. France, before we go to discussion amongst the two committees, I think it'd be a good opportunity to go to public comment, both here in person as well as online.
Thank you for
Just to make sure
the
everybody's
nudge
heard.
and reminder. With that, I'll look for public comment, and if you could help me with on the webinar.
So I have no in-person public comment slips at this time, but I do have 2 hands raised through Zoom. First up is Hillary Blackerby. You can unmute yourself and begin.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, committee members. Wish I was there with you, but the bell has tolled for me on the coronavirus front. Otherwise, I'd be up there with you. So just wanted to tune in as a member of the public and want to thank the staff and consultants who've been doing such a great job at outreach. I'm just going to give my 2 cents here as a member of the public. Agree with a lot of the comments so far. Just on the transit piece, you know, from my own perspective, some of the comments about efficiency and, you know, cute little vehicles and things like that. Just a reminder that like things that are efficient generally like carry more people as opposed to a bunch of small things going around. And want to make sure that, much like we're doing on all the other urban planning aspects, want to make sure these things are tested in the real world, have good, sound transit planning practices behind them. I don't expect that they won't with the team that's working on this, but I know that sometimes people in the public sort of get an idea and pursue it to the end of the earth, whether it necessarily makes sense or not. So that's one thing I think we just need to be very sober about. Generally, you know, I think what we're hearing from folks with regards to cycling and safety, extremely important. But I do think that there's an engineering answer for all of this, and we will find a way to get to something that makes sure everyone using whatever mode is as safe as possible and still has a nice experience, is able to experience the downtown. Secure bike parking, vital, something we don't really have in most parts of the city, and also finding ways to maintain our extremely successful bike share system and have it integrated into the area. I can't actually see a timer from my Zoom, so one last thing I'll mention. Yeah, go ahead.
Ms. Blackerby will give you all the time you need.
Well, I should be resting, so I'll just add a couple more things. Before I got sick, I joined the club of perhaps at times insufferable people who've now visited Barcelona, and made sure to take a lot of pictures of sort of specific things that I saw with regards to bike transit and pedestrian infrastructure that I found interesting, that I thought could have good applications here, you know, sort of wonky specific things that I'm sure we'll get to chat about in future meetings or workshops. Obviously, Europe doesn't have everything figured out, but there were some things that a transportation nerd like me was trying to focus on to see in a place that has a very long closure in La Rambla, but really makes it work with consistent transit along the sides and slow streets adjacent for bikes and things like that. But I think we're going to have the best one once we figure this all out. And I look forward to working with you all and the team and the general public to come up with something great. Thank you.
Thank you. Other public speakers?
Yes, next is Robin Elander. You please unmute and you may begin.
Good morning, committee members, as well as city staff, public. I wanted to just share that I really appreciate this really thoughtful conversation, and I'm at home taking vigorous notes on what might be able to be implemented more quickly, as well as what people are saying for the future. I did attend the different design workshops on the Friday and Saturday, as well as the open house, and I thought that they were super well attended and that there was really great input that is also being reflected here on the dais. And I just wanted to mainly just share that I'm listening in, and I'm thankful for all of your comments, and I will stop at that point and look forward to working with you all as we work through this process and implement everything along the way. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then next up is Barbara Silver. Please unmute and you may begin. Barbara, please unmute and you may begin.
Okay, have I succeeded in unmuting?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Oh, okay, thank you. So I too am sorry to be sidelined this morning. So two things came up. One about families and where they would eat, and another about policy changes. And something that I've noticed in other cities that was made it exciting on the street were food vendors. And that's been a really hot topic in this city for such a long time. But I wanted to mention that food vendors are one of those things that do make the street more lively for families and others as well. So just that point. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Silver. It looks like we do have one public comment here in the council chambers. Please introduce yourself.
Yeah. Good morning. My name is Brad Smith, just a member of the public. Thank you, everybody, for your time and attention to this matter. One thing I wanted to just point out is something I've noticed. I moved downtown last October, and in large part that was because of the differences to State Street. All of a sudden, my wife and I felt more interested in living downtown. Prior to the closure of State Street, one of the things that I heard as a response to advocates to closing down, people who did not want to close down State Street to cars, was that they were afraid that if cars were removed, that would actually further sort of deaden the street. There'd be even less activity, and then that would even further discourage people from visiting, which at the time I thought I didn't agree with. I thought it would be fine. We should still do a pedestrian mall. Well, fortunately, we did create a pedestrian mall, and that has proven not necessarily to be the case. People are coming down to State Street, at least in my opinion, from what I can tell, more, and I'm one of those examples. So then in thinking about how to integrate pedestrians and cyclists, initially I thought, okay, well, what if we just remove cyclists? We have dedicated bike lanes on the arterials on either side, and we just dedicated the pedestrian mall purely to pedestrians. And then I had a concern, well, what if by removing cyclists, it deadens the street, and then that perhaps discourages people from attending? Because I know there are times when I'm walking down State Street, and there will be few pedestrians, especially if it's earlier in the morning, or kind of in that lull in the afternoon before the nightlife picks up. However, I can always depend on some cyclists, which gives me some of that psychological safety that I'm not alone on the street. However, I recently, like one of the previous speakers, visited Europe recently, Copenhagen and London, and again, be insufferable myself. But one of the things I noticed is that in London, there were very little cyclists, and there were a few streets that were pedestrian shopping malls that were just pedestrian, that were so filled with people, it is the holiday shopping season, that I didn't think about the lack of cars or the lack of cyclists. I went to Copenhagen on their main pedestrian mall, where there were a combination of pedestrians and cyclists, primarily pedestrians. The density of pedestrians was much higher, so then what occurred to me is this simple realization that it's not necessarily about the modality, it's just about the presence of others. So I guess the primary thing I want to communicate here is thinking about transportation and circulation, obviously from the logistical point of view, but then also from that psychological point of view, is thinking about not just in terms of what's going to move people efficiently, but what's also going to create that sense of community, that sort of group psychological safety that we might have. And I think that we can accomplish that with almost any modality. It's just about ensuring that we have the right combination of ratio modalities that match our community and our unique uses to make sure that we're continuing to just keep essentially people downtown. That could be cars on cross streets, that could be cyclists, or it could be only pedestrians, as long as we're actually seeing the numbers that are going to create that positive feedback loop and keep more people downtown. And I think that that's something that we can maintain flexibility with throughout time. Thank you.
Nice. And thank you so much. Seeing no further public comment, thank you. I will close public comment, and I will turn it back to our staff if needed to help reintroduce the prompts for our input as a discussion.
Thank you, Chair and committee members. So just re-highlighting, we want to take a few minutes to ask both committees really what is working or what do you want to see change downtown, and then what do you want staff and the MIG team to make sure that we keep in mind as we're starting to work through some of the preliminary design concepts. So from your expertise on the Downtown Parking Committee and Transportation and Circulation Committee, perhaps what are the things that you would want to see different in the downtown space? And then what are the things that we need to make sure that we recognize right now so that we can try to avoid a pitfall in the future?
I have a question about the question.
Yes, a clarifying question. Ms. Horn?
Are you talking about what's working now, or are you talking about what's working pre-COVID? Because when I think about what's working, I think about before, the way
It's a
we
great
have
question.
it now.
We can ask it both ways. So I think if you clarify in your response what you felt was working prior to the closure, I think that would also be very helpful.
Thank you.
Again, a clarifying question, and then we'll get a discussion. Ms. Rodriguez.
It's, your chart says pick one, so would you like us to only comment on one item?
You can pick more than one. Just I just want to make sure that we hear from the both committees and everybody that would like to provide some input. So you can certainly talk through more than one of those questions. I just ask that you be mindful of everybody on both committees.
So before we jump in, just to be mindful of everyone's time, often our DPC meetings will wrap around 9 o'clock. However, we hold to 9:30. My presumption is that to get the input, we're probably going to go further than 15 minutes. So I'm going to manage accordingly. But because we are a joint meeting and just our questions took quite a long time, I think all valuable. Let's just really try to be as prompt as we can be in directing useful input for our process. So with that, I will switch and shift to this side of the aisle for comments and back and trying to be fair and balanced here. So Mr. Newkirk.
I could probably go for half an hour, but I'll try to be brief. What is working? There's no private vehicles on State Street. I think if we ever entertain even allowing private vehicles back on State Street, it's a failure of the project in the city. I don't know why we would ever really do that. I understand the commercial vehicles are a different story and emergency vehicles, but I don't know why we would ever do that. I like the outdoor dining. I think bringing vitality to the 80 feet is valuable, and I think there's every intent of continuing that. What do I hope? I look at that temporality slide 40, and I really look at that bottom right example. The other three are way wider. They're like a Beacon Street in Boston or something like that, where there's like a parkway in the middle. That's not what we have here. We don't have that width. 80 feet just isn't that much. It seems like a lot, but it really isn't. And so I just think we need to be mindful of what we actually can achieve in that space. And when you count the 20 feet for emergency access, I question dedicated bike space. I looked at some of the examples from the workshop and kind of trying to meander. I know there were conversations about bike speed as a concern. I kind of think just having it in a communal space with pedestrians, and then perhaps at times it just doesn't work to have bicycles using that space. I think when you try to account for them on a separate part of that 80 feet, I think that gets problematic. One of the things now that I don't think is working is the street's open, but you're still crossing the street when you cross State Street. You still have to look. It's just that bikes replace cars. So it's not a pedestrian mall at this point. It doesn't feel like that to me. So I think that needs to be considered. And then, I really appreciate Brad Smith's comments. We need more people, whether it's residents or hotels. I think one of the values of hotels, and this isn't designing for locals, but they're going to eat out every night. They're going to spend money. And I think one of the things that I don't think is working, and it didn't work before the closure, is nighttime is dreary on State Street. And we need more people downtown. I think during the work hours, there's a lot of people milling about, but at nighttime, there's not a lot. And this is one design element, is it needs to be brighter at night. It's dark. It's not like that nice, like if there wasn't improved lighting, it wouldn't be a nice mall in the evenings. Even just like the holiday lighting, I think makes a real difference. And somehow designing the lighting in the evening to make it a more like warm feeling and welcoming place, I think would be really valuable. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Labrie.
Okay, I'll just add a few comments. Big picture, I just want to point out that our tendency as a community to keep everything low and squat is really going to limit what we can do, big picture, long term. And so as we look at creating a downtown that's really vibrant, I hope that we have a companion conversation about being more open as a community to higher development, and that will just open up tons of opportunities at ground level. But what is not working right now, in my opinion, having 2 sidewalks and then a street with the landscaping breaking it up into 3 corridors really does something psychologically, and it's hampering the vitality in terms of economics, and it limits what you can do. So I'd really like to see larger open spaces flexible by not having tons of installed, a really rigid design. One of the things that's really appealing about European plazas and open space is that it really is generally quite open in my experience. One of my hopes for the future is that we really will capitalize on this moment in time to bring housing and simultaneously economic and cultural vitality downtown. This, State Street creates this opportunity, I think. What's going on in the world creates the opportunity, but State Street is this great opportunity to solve much more than just the corridors issues. And I really would like to see focus on engaging the 0 blocks of the side streets and that what is an unfinished Paseos master plan that bisects all those blocks on either side of State. So I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Thank you. And then I actually have a request coming from Ms. Rodriguez, and something that would be helpful for us to not repeat too much. If it's possible for you all to label and use some of the wall space for comments, that's a request if doable.
Tape up your pages.
Cool. Thank you so much. And shifting, Mr. Zarate, do you have any comments?
Yeah, I do think the closure of State Street is working, and I do like that. One thing that I've seen work in other cities when we talk about like live events is like, like a block party. Yeah, I'm a musician, so this is like pertains to my own taste, but like a block party where you have bands and you set up a little stage. I played at a festival like this in Chicago, the Wicker Park Fest, and it was great. And I walked down the whole street they had, and I shopped while I waited for my set. And I think we could do stuff like that, Imarinari type stuff. I'm not, maybe not chalk main State Street, but you could do something like that and do different types of events. And as we see the parking lots make more revenue when there's events like a fiesta or stuff like that, if we were able to plan more things like that, I think it'd be beneficial. That's my take.
Great. Thank you. Please, Ms. Rodriguez.
I think other people are going to say similar things. I could comment on every statement, but I won't. I want to simply add something that hasn't been brought up. And in talking about inclusivity and trying to make sure we have the different members of the community feel comfortable on State Street. I've lived in Santa Barbara over 50 years. And one of the things I love about Santa Barbara is that we have neighborhoods. And I've always loved that you have the west side, you've got Milpas, you've got State Street, and even San Roque has a little bit of a feel. But I don't think we can be everything to everybody, and I don't think that's necessary. I think people do enjoy their own neighborhood for their own market, their own sort of place that they want to go. So I guess I would just want to warn about that if we try to be everything to everybody, we might not be anything. I think that's important to think about. So.
Thank you. Yes, Ms. Steinschlag.
Yeah, thank you. I agree that I think just flat out, we should never have cars on State Street going down the length of it again. I noticed it does look like the accident data shows that accidents are going down as people have adjusted to the space, I assume, and that's great to see. I think like one of our commenters said, the perception of safety also matters, and I think a lot of people do still feel like there's conflict. From my previous experience with bikes and pedestrian interactions, I really believe that it would be very beneficial to have a more divided areas for pedestrians and bikes rather than kind of mixing in that center space as they are now. I think we often, and so what I would suggest would be keeping bikes in that center pathway that has to be 20 feet open anyway as an access road. I would put bikes there. I think we discuss that when we talk about like dividing bikes and pedestrians, we're talking about keeping bikes in a certain spot away from this, but I also think bikes in the center would encourage pedestrians more towards the side, and pedestrians should be closer to the side because the pedestrians are the ones who would see a business and then just like pop in on a spur of the moment. I think that's especially important for retail on State Street where, you might walk by, you need to see something in the window, it looks interesting, you're gonna go in. If you're a pedestrian on the sidewalk, you see that. If you're a bike, you're not stopping just because a window looks good. You've got a place to go and a bike with you. I agree that as it is now, with pedestrians kind of mingling in the center, you can't see past that like vegetation curtain. And so I think we do need to make the retail spaces more visible to pedestrians and keep pedestrians closer. Keeping bikes in the center would also reduce the number of times that people are crossing bike paths or the bike kind of area, which I think is especially important if we have whatever the parklets turn into, if there's tables out there and, people are carrying their whole lunch and with all their kids and drinks and everything, you don't want them stepping in front of a bike, so bikes should be kind of in the area that would have the fewest crosses as possible. And then on kind of the housing question, this is sort of a separate note, but having more housing on State Street, I think would also allows a diversity of businesses that we don't have now. There's a lot of retail and restaurants. When I lived a block or two from State Street, like I went to FedEx all the time just to like print out a couple pages, and like locals go to, as a tourist, you don't go to FedEx. But as a local, like that was where I like did kind of life errands and stuff. And so I think having more housing allows State Street to be more than restaurants and restaurants and like some retail. And so that like just opens up new avenues for economic revitalization. And so that I think is another like design for locals that's not some of the other like kind of family areas that we talked about, but just doing your errands. Like you could have bodegas on State Street and things like that. All right, thank you.
Great, thank you. Ms. Horn.
I just love what I've been hearing today. Just has really focused my mind on some of the things that are important to me, and realizing I had been thinking how important it was to have bikes on State Street because of some advocacy issues, but I just realized I really think they should not be on State Street unless they're being walked. because of the safety and it's not, there's no open feeling if you have to worry about bikes and being hit or trying to be safe from bikes. So I just like the idea of it being open. And so that's what I picture. And the idea too of there being corridor lanes and stuff, that really does not add to an open feeling and a safe feeling. So I don't like the idea of it being divided up into corridors at all. I'm just kind of thinking off what you were saying. And that's really what I like about the other models that I've been in around the United States and the world. So, and also the thing about structures, like all the restaurants that have their street buildings, structures, that also is not, there's not an open feeling with that. I mean, where you have cafes, like maybe a little bit on the sidewalks, near their places, that's different. But the way it is now with those structures is, I think, very limiting, and doesn't give a feeling of openness, and not adaptable, to different kinds of events and temporality kinds of things. So, and I love the idea of having. I've always thought that having more housing in the area will be so important to being a neighborhood, people doing like you talked about, their errands, just in the area, and very economically stimulating to have a neighborhood where people are living and working and shopping and living. So that's very economically more viable too. So those are some of my thoughts.
Thank you. Ms. Sanford.
Okay, my notes are kind of messy, so hopefully I can keep track of them. I guess I'd start by saying what's working. I agree with several of the comments made, keeping cars off of State Street. I think it'd be a step backwards to bring cars back, and there's so much that we have to gain by keeping cars off State. I also just want to state that I really support the parklets on State Street. I think we have way too good of weather to to really be storing people indoors and keeping them indoors when they really want to be outdoors and in the sun. Speaking to bikes on State Street, I'd like to keep bikes on State Street. I think it's really important to ensure that people on bikes can kind of get from A to B and get to where they're going. There's a pretty high mode share of bicyclists in Santa Barbara, and so it's also keeping with our community's bicycle master plan and circulation master plan to further support biking in our community. And as long as State Street is going to be sort of the heart of our community, I think that keeping bicycle accessibility on State Street is really important. And then I think that further to that, just being able to see shops on State Street and access them, having that visibility is super important. I also want to speak to like the seasonality of State Street. So it tends to be like people, like I'm sure all of us have noticed, in the summer there can be a lot of pedestrian activity, but in the winter and in the evening it does sort of, taper off, and having eyes on the street and having people on the street and having the street be more vibrant and be more full of people is I think really important to sort of the success of State Street. And so I think if you can maintain bicycling on the street, it certainly contributes to making the street feel more vibrant. That being said, I don't want to see, I think perceived safety is really important, and I think that when we look at safety data and collisions, we sometimes lose like the perception of safety. Part of that is because we can't collect collision data that well, and then part of it is just that things get lost when we're only looking at collision data. And so I wouldn't want to have to design this because I think it's going to be technically challenging. But I think that my recommendation or a hope for the future would be some type of soft separation that maintains bicycle access, but also provides them the opportunity to like leave the bike lane or something similar to a bike lane. And then moving on to like what's not working, I think that the asphalt on State Street is just generally really unattractive and kind of contributes to why people still perceive it as a street instead of a pedestrian promenade. It's also just really hot in the summer and would be obviously a lot nicer if it could be painted or something like that. I think something that's not working is the corners on State Street. So I'd love to see sort of an analysis done on converting some of the red curb zones to passenger drop zones and/or transit stops. Consistently, we kind of come back to this challenge around if we're removing cars from State Street, how are people who are car dependent, are people with mobility issues, how are they able to still somehow get as close as possible to their destination? An example I would bring up is like the Granada Theater. People used to be able to drop off there. And so what can we do at the corner of Anapamu to provide like more accessibility? And so something that I'd love to see us look at is encouraging more loading zones and/or transit stops or passenger drop-off zones at the corners. And one advantage of that would be that it actually improves the line of sight. And so for people who are biking or walking through there, they're more visible to cross traffic. I want to touch on really quickly, like parades on State Street. I'd like to see them come back. I participate in the parades a lot, and I kind of consider it part of my civic duty. You know, it's great to get out there and help activate our community. I'd also like to see some of the red tape removed on non-city sanctioned events. So I'd like to make it easier to have a block party on State Street. Right now, we do a really good job with the Solstice Parade. We sadly lost the Christmas Parade. But overall, I'd like to see the red tape removed and to make it easier for community members to pilot and do events and activate the street themselves, whether that was like dedicated pools of funding that were more promoted and accessible. I'd like to expand, going back to what's not working. Parking is obviously an important resource in our community, but I do think it's important to kind of expand beyond parking. A lot of our parking lots were built before really the advent of like Uber and Lyft, and so this kind of plays into the necessity for loading zones that support those kind of newer modes and promoting bike share and integrating those things better into State Street. What's not working is spaces for kids and teens. We absolutely need to carve those out and figure out a way to fund that and incorporate that. And that's really kind of a policy level issue. And then what's not working is a lack of just downtown housing and the lack of affordable housing. This is a community-wide issue, but I think that State Street and just the sheer volume of empty lots and city resources focused on the area provides a really important opportunity. And we'd be remiss if I know this is kind of a mobility project, but we'd be remiss not to address the dire lack of affordable housing and the housing crisis that Santa Barbara is facing. And certainly, I'd say that there's probably at least 20 hotels in the city development pipeline right now that are moving through the permitting process, and there's certainly not enough affordable housing to even begin to support the employees that we'll need for those hotels or for downtown businesses even currently. And so I'd say housing all the way. Yeah, okay. And then my last comment is just related to my question, and I think it's just always important, especially with regards to State Street, to come back to like user perceived comfort and not just look at the data, because there's something that gets lost in the picture because so many people are walking and biking on State Street, and then Anacapa and Chapala kind of fall off the map because they don't show up in the collision data in the same way. And so, yeah, just looking at, as we kind of plan for State Street, looking at perception of safety. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Sanford. Mr. Rodriguez, you have one quick thing to add.
Yeah, I spoke briefly, so I do, these other comments are really stimulating my thinking now. I want to emphasize the kids and teen spaces issue that you mentioned, and I'd like to give an example of something that really isn't working. I have grandchildren here in Santa Barbara, and they like to go to the Moxie, and that's not in the corridor, but I think it's a good example of what's not working that we don't want to repeat in the blocked area. The Moxie's a beautiful museum. They don't allow any food in there. You can't, there's no little picnic spots inside of it. So when I've got little kids, I have to leave the museum, and there's very limited dining. There's no cute little sandwich shops that are reasonable, to take some kids. And so it isn't really a terribly friendly environment. You'd like a vendor or a small sandwich shop, or street vendors would be wonderful. So if we do move in the new State Street area to maybe create some child-friendly spaces, whether it's play structures or museums or places for concerts, outdoor, daytime concerts, we need to have reasonably priced food available and outdoor benches, outdoor tables and seating to make it friendly. And I don't know how you do that with the bikes going by. I have no answer for that. But I would love to see permanent play structures in the middle of State Street, strategically, things that small kids play on. Parents like to sit and watch their kids be active, and they would go to local little places to eat, ice cream shops, whatever. But we used to have a wonderful Italian deli downtown. It's been gone for years.
And the Greek Deli.
The Great Deli, and nobody's replaced that. So, okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. I want to build on that, and I will try to thank you all so much for all this time, and this is looking really lovely. I really appreciate you all taking the effort to put this up on the wall, visualizing ideas. I really appreciate how the concepts of Main Street and having everyone in Santa Barbara have more of a feel of Main Street has come up in this discussion. I do want to actually say to these last points, 15 years ago, we tried to organize a youth bike criterium in De La Guerra Plaza with city parks, and it was shut down by the downtown organization for some fear-based thinking. And literally, the fun police have done their job over the last couple decades of making State Street less friendly to the community. And we have to like reconcile this. And to the point of the living experiment that we're having is the thing that's working the most right now is that this community is actually learning by doing, and it's been incapable of doing that for decades. And it took a pandemic to allow us to actually like try things, right? And some of it's working and some of it's not. Right? But nothing's like terrible. It's all learning opportunities. So things that are working, the outdoor dining as an experience, absolutely working. The land grab of building structures in the public right-of-way, right, that impede other uses and that are not temporary in nature, not working. The greenery that's been invested over decades is part of the beauty of the space. But definitely the way that the things are divided out. For example, we're talking about bikes, and we talk about not wanting to divide that out, but we have 3 different channels. We have 2 different sidewalks on the frontages, then we have different banks of parklets, and then we have this space, and we're wondering why there's a conflict. Like, that's a design problem. I do want to say, for the concept of cycling, we can't speak out of 2 different sides of our mouth. On one side, the State Street was called the spine of the bicycle network. And on the other side, we're saying, well, maybe we shouldn't have bikes there. We can't do that. That's schizophrenic. So there's some design needs. I do want to say that bike share is really working, and we heard that from some of the comments. That probably should be, I was surprised that wasn't more included with what staff was presenting. And to the point of other access, one of the comments about people not being able to engage with the space was actually driving through. And people also were able to do that in a commercial sense. And I will say, something that wasn't working pre-pandemic was the new electric buses looked like armored vehicles, right? And they were incompatible with the space. Something in the presentation of stuff out of San Diego or wherever, some type of something that could allow not just people with limited mobility closer access to their destinations, but also some type of recreational engagement with the space for people who are non-ambulatory, it's something that we would like you all to design. I would like to see more of. I think that, I have to say one more thing, the regulatory environment. People talk a lot about rent. What do you call the term for tenant improvements, right? I think you should just track like an index of like what tenant improvements cost for all the different frontages on State Street, and that should be our indication of whether or not we're gonna have retail vibrancy. It's a joke. Like it's so high. People have often said it's our policy taking it out on the present for not having done more in the past in terms of keeping up with codes and whatnot. And a lot of people have to face this. Similarly, in terms of regulatory, we are a living experiment, and it's great that we're doing so much. There are two different ends of how we're not properly using our city committees. On one hand, the green lanes on State, both the way those went in and the way those went out, did not utilize existing committees. It's a little bit of a charade to host committees if we're not going to engage them, even if it's informational. And so that's something I do want to say, like, hey, let's pause. Another thing, though, is that there are committees that clearly are giving direction outside of their purview, and the city apparatus, whether legally or managerially, has not prevented that from being put in check. And as a result, all of our projects are being significantly impacted in the downtown. So I'll leave it at that. What a great set of input and what a great process. In the spirit of time, I will close this discussion from the dais. So back to any closing comments from staff.
Thank you all, committee members. I just wanted really just to take a moment to thank you for taking the time out of your day this morning to meet with us and to hear about the process and to also provide your input. And I hope that, and I know that this won't be the last time that we're in front of you. I really want to continue to engage both committees and have a dialogue and make sure that we're getting your expertise and understanding what some of those issues are downtown, both from the circulation and transportation side and from all the work that the Downtown Parking Committee does as well. And so this is, again, one of the early stages in the process. We are going to be moving quickly. And so in the next 6 months, we're going to have a design concept for everybody to really comment and provide feedback on. And that's a time where I'm sure that we will come back to you and get more comments as well. I also would encourage both committees to continue to engage in the process outside of the committee and join the public meetings that we have, join the community workshops that we'll be having. They're really I felt just personally, it was really enlightening to see all of the different community members. We had such a range of demographics on Friday and Saturday. People that were coming from all over in the community, all ages participated, from teenagers up to elderly. And it was exciting to see the variety of perspectives, and I think even today we're seeing there are different viewpoints between the committee members, and that's okay. We're not there. I think if we get to a plan where most agree or many feel comfortable in it, it also will feel a little uncomfortable. There isn't a perfect design here, and I do want to emphasize that it won't mean that 100% of people are loving what the end result is, but I think if we can address some of the key issues that we have downtown and really try to make it a space that's unique and exciting, and that's a place to be for everybody here, and that's a place where you feel like, wow, this is really my community, and this is where I want to go meet my friends for coffee or go take a walk. I mean, that is a place in and of itself. So it's a big task, but just thank you all for taking the time and sharing your thoughts and all of your input with us.
Thank you all. I would like to close this item and move on to item 7, which is we adjourn. Cool. Thank you all so much for facilitating this meeting of Down Parking and Transportation Circulation Committee, and thank you all, staff, for an excellent presentation.